Hey everybody, this is part 2 of the chocolate custard pie fiasco. And yes, it really was a fiasco. It was definitely a roller coaster of an adventure making that pie. A lot of work went into it and I'm pretty disappointed by it. And I just kind of wanted to tell my story of why I chose this and how it kind of came to be the way it ended up. I chose this recipe again because I thought it would be something nice to do for a holiday video, something different, but that would be good for on a holiday table or after Thanksgiving for dessert, that type of thing. I decided a few days before filming that I was going to use that recipe for the video, and I stupidly thought to myself, this is going to be simple. There's really not that much to it. Yeah, that was my first mistake. I should never think that. Every time I think a recipe is going to be simple, it ends up being complicated or difficult, or I have issues. So I should watch my thoughts and just go with, it's going to be great, but maybe not simple. About 2 nights before the video filming, I was just falling asleep and my eyes kind of popped open in bed and I thought, wait a minute, this is a 1940s recipe. You know, are the oven temperatures going to be compatible with my modern oven? And yeah, that was a good question. So I looked it up and yes, they were compatible, so that was good. But I actually ended up learning a little bit about history and the history of ovens. I found out that the temperature dial on an ovens, even when, you know, in the 20s and 30s, people had ovens, but they didn't even necessarily have a temperature gauge. They might have had a gauge that said something like warm or hot or medium heat or very hot, that type of thing. They might not have had the numbers on the temperature dial. And I guess in the 1940s, that is when that became more standardized. So thankfully, with my 1949 cookbook, the temperatures did coincide with my modern day oven. So that did not end up being a big deal. One of the things I also found out when I was researching about the old time ovens was that before the 1940s, when people used things, even like wood burning stoves, in order to determine how hot it was, if the oven was the right temperature to bake whatever you were making, there were a couple ways that people would test that. One way would be to stick your hand in the oven and see how long it took for, you know, until you couldn't keep your hand in there any longer. And that was a way of determining how hot the oven was and if it was warm enough to cook your food. And another one was sticking a piece of paper into the oven and seeing how long it took for the paper to burn. And that would tell you how hot the oven was. So those were some interesting history tidbits that I found out when I was doing my research. But then I also thought, okay, I have to use almond milk for this recipe. And normally when I make a pumpkin pie, because that's almost like kind of a custardy filling, because I do use almond milk for that too, I have to add cornstarch to make sure that it firms up. So I researched that, and yes, I did need to add cornstarch to the custard pie as well. And it came down to needing about 1 tablespoon of cornstarch per egg. And there were 3 eggs in this recipe, so I used 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. Great, I think that worked just fine. And then I also was told that, what did I read? That you have to, because when you make a pie with almond milk, there are different amounts of fats and proteins in the almond milk than there are in regular dairy milk. And so in order to keep the pie from cracking, which my pumpkin pies always get a crack in them, you are supposed to cook it in a water bath, or a bain-marie is what it's called. which means that you put it in a separate, you take your pie and your pie plate and you put it in a separate pan. And you just need to make sure you have about an inch of leeway between the pie plate and the exterior pan. And then you put the whole thing in the oven. And when you do that, you pour like boiling hot water into that pan and to about halfway up your pie plate. And then it insulates and the water kind of moves around and it helps so you don't get a crack, which my pumpkin pies, they don't just get little cracks, they get like the Grand Canyon of cracks. It'll be like one big crack line going this way and another one going this way, and it's just, yeah. So I definitely thought, okay, well then I should do the Bain Marie water bath. And I had never done that before. As I said in the last video, I don't make a ton of pies. So this was a little bit new for me, but it was fun and it was a challenge. It's just, it had some difficulties. The last thing I read too was that when you're making a custard type pie with almond milk, you also want to use a little bit less almond milk than what the recipe calls for. So I did do that in the filling, but I did not do that in the chocolate, which I don't know why. That chocolate topping, you could tell in the last video, it got pretty drippy and watery. And even sitting in the fridge overnight and through part of the next day till I could do the taste test, you could see that it was getting even more watery on the top, like liquidy. And it was thin liquidy, not good when you're cutting it. It didn't look pretty. So I don't know why I did that, but I did in the filling and the filling worked because I used a little bit less milk in it. So that was fun. And then, you know, as I was making the pie, no problem, put in your cornstarch, use your little bit less milk, use the water bath. But then I had to take the pie out of the oven halfway through the bake and put on the topping. And the topping I had to cook on the stove using a double broiler while the pie was in the oven. And the topping was chocolate and sugar and milk. So as I'm making the topping, I melted the chocolate, and as soon as I added the milk, the whole thing just split and the chocolate became really grainy. And I thought, oh gosh, great. You know, I got the chocolate too hot and then I added the milk and it just split and curdled, because the instructions just say to melt the chocolate and then add the milk and sugar and keep stirring and cooking until it's smooth and slightly thicker. Great, okay. Well, it split, so I thought I had done something wrong. So I just actually threw that away in the sink and I started over completely while my pie was in the oven baking. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh crap, because the pie's gonna be done and it's gonna come out of the oven and I am gonna have to let it just sit on the counter before I can put the topping on, and it's gonna start to cool. And you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to put the topping on, like have it ready, put it on and pop the whole thing back in. So I was doing my second batch and I melted the chocolate. I melted it a little bit lower of a temperature so that it wouldn't split. But as soon as I put in the milk, it split again. And I was like, no, double fail. I was stirring it furiously and I was like, okay, I just, it has to just stay on the burner. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll come back together and smooth out, because that chocolate was just so grainy. It just looked gross. But after a few minutes, it started to look a bit smoother. And then the pie had to come out of the oven. So the pie came out of the oven and I was stirring, and it did. It actually, the topping turned smooth and it looked really nice. It turned shiny and silky. It was great. And I thought, this looks like the toppings that they put when they make one of those mirror cakes where they just pour it on the really smooth cake surface and it all just goes down and it's shiny like a mirror. That's kind of what this looked like. And I thought, this might be cool. So I put it onto the pie and the topping did look really shiny and cool. When I put it on, it did have that mirrored effect. It was so neat until I put it back in the oven, but we will get there. So I put the topping on the pie and then the pie was still in the water bath and I put the whole thing back into the oven. Oven's over there. And Then I realized partway through that I should have taken it out of the water bath when I pulled it out of the oven and put the topping on, because the top crust was cooking and it was getting a little bit golden, but the underneath, when you looked, you could see like under the water there, the crust looked like it was still really white and doughy, and I thought, oh no, I should have taken it out of the bath. You know, it didn't crack, so yes, definite win there. So at this point, the topping is boiling on top of the cake, of the pie, not a cake, a pie. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that's supposed to happen. But then I had to pull the whole thing out of the oven to take the pie plate out of the water bath and then put it back in on the shelf. And then I had no idea at this point how long to cook it, when it was going to be done, and because I had already opened the oven more than I should and let all the heat out. That second time I had to take it out. And also the I thought, well, the top is going to be cooked, but the bottom is going to be raw. Like, how the heck long do I leave it in there? So it was all just kind of a crapshoot. And when I took it out of the oven, I noticed that the chocolate topping was starting to firm up. Actually, the whole thing was starting to firm up when it started to cool down, so I was pretty happy. And the topping looked kind of cool and crinkly, and it still had a nice shine. And I thought, well, this is great. You know, okay, it's cooked, it's gonna be great. And then I thought to myself, wait, okay, so this is really hot, and how long do you have to wait to cut this? Because it was getting late in the afternoon and I was losing the light in the kitchen. I thought, I'm not gonna be able to do the tasting today. I'll have to do it tomorrow. Because then I looked up on the internet that apparently when you make a custard pie, you are supposed to let it sit on a rack for 2 or 3 hours until it cools down to room temperature, and then you're supposed to put it in the fridge for at least an hour. And I did not have time to do all of that. So once it cooled down, I put it in the fridge overnight. I put it in a pie Tupperware, the whole thing, just put the whole plate in there. And I thought, okay, I'll taste it in the morning or in the early afternoon after lunch. But in the morning when I got up, I went and looked at the pie, and when I jiggled it, you could tell that the filling had firmed, but some of the chocolate topping was still liquidy. So I knew that it was going to be kind of messy when I cut it. But I didn't realize how messy, because when I looked at it again this afternoon to do the taste test, a lot more of it had turned runny. It's almost like the moisture in that Tupperware container made it start to get runny. Could have been too that some, it wasn't completely cooked enough, as we talked about in the last video. Definitely I ate some more after I turned off the camera, and it was not cooked enough. That is the story of making this chocolate custard pie. If the whole thing had been chocolate flavored all the way through, it would have been good. But just having the chocolate topping on top of the eggy custard filling, not really my thing. This also isn't a very sweet dessert either. So if you're looking for something that's pretty sweet, then I don't recommend it. But if you do want to make this, definitely use the whole milk and give it a try, and let me know what you think, especially if you already know you like custard. That would be great. So thanks for listening to my really long-winded, crazy adventure. Seriously, it was such a roller coaster. I had so many highs and lows with this. The highs when the chocolate, well, the low when the chocolate split when I was making the topping, and then the serious high when it worked the second time and it was all like mirror glazy and just pretty and smooth and shiny. Yeah, lots of ups and downs. But thank you for watching, and I look forward to making another video and baking something else and hopefully redeeming myself. I think I might wait a little while before I do another pie, but I would like to bake something soon. So I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.